Hello.
Yeah, no?
Yeah, can you see my screen, my console?
Yeah,
So let's start with Elastic.
your audio's a little off.
Okay. Now is it fine?
Yeah, it's fine now.
Okay. Let's go into Elastic Block Storage. So in the Elastic Block Storage, you can see that you have to directly go into EC2 instance. The first way to initialize it is when you launch an instance, you are always asked about name of the instance. Let's call it instance trial. And here you will be asked to select some OS. You can select any. I'm selecting Ubuntu, and this is free tier eligible. That's why I'm selecting T2. And you should always have some key pair. You can just call it. It will download the PEM key for you, and you have some network, and you can just key, like which are allowed. You can allow all the traffic, and I'm not having any kind of like restrictions as of now. And here you can see this is the configure storage. Going to advanced, you can see that this is the EBS. You can see the storage type is EBS. You see the information. It will tell you like what are EBS and everything. Now here GP2 is kind of like default, right? And GP2 is a SSD solid state drive, and you can always change it. So you have GP2 and you have IO1, you have cold HDD, throughput optimized HDD. So these two are hard disk drives, and there is also a magnetic standard drive. And these three are having latency issues because these are not solid state in nature, but all these are solid state in nature. So you can see there is general purpose 2, general purpose 3, input output 1, input output 2. So IO1 when we use, so when you see IO1, it will show you like you can adjust how many input output operations per second can be performed. You see the info is saying that input output operations like you can have up to 64,000. So do you think this will be uh, costlier than the HDD? Can so when you see HDD, it is not even supporting any kind of like operations. And also you can see smallest volume size for this is 125. So you have to take at least 125 GB of space. Then only you can use this SC1. Now throughput optimized also, and it's also saying that you cannot use it for root volume. So why do you think this cannot be used for root volume, Brandon?
So could you repeat the question?
Yeah, why we cannot use this for root volume? The standard or like throughput optimized HDD or cold HDD or magnetic. Magnetic can be used, but why these two cannot be used?
I'm not sure.
Again, latency, right? OS requires the speed. So, and HDD doesn't provide you that much fast input output operation. You cannot save the file faster. So that's why AWS has completely removed HDD based root storage where the OS is being accessed. Clear? Any doubt here?
No.
Now, what is magnetic storage? Any idea? So, magnetic storage is nothing but it is also known as like small data storage or something like that. So, it is actually SSD, solid state drive. Okay, but this magnetic is usually used if you are having why like it's kind of like a if you are having small databases or small workloads. For that, you can use magnetic storage, and it is the cheapest available service for EBS. Usually, people use GP2 or GP3, and you can see that in GP2 also you are having 375 out of 3000 input operations. Like, and if you go for GP3, you can see you can adjust it, and even for IO1, you can adjust it. Now, what is the difference between IO1 and GP2? Is that this IO1 storage can be attached to multiple EC2 instances, but the same thing cannot be done using the GP2 or GP3. And IO1 is also having like it is more faster than the GP2. And what do you think this delete or termination means? Ken,
Means when you terminate the instance, the information should be deleted.
so is this a wise uh, way to choose? Like if you choose yes, so every time you terminate the instance, you will lose the EBS also, right? So when do you want that to happen? Uh, can you think of any scenario where it would be preferable to delete a EBS instance when the EC2 instance is terminated?
I would say if we have things relating to security issues.
Yeah. So if you have worked on very confidential or sensitive information and you have already utilized everything you want, then when you're terminating the AWS EC2 instance, then you can select that okay, this should be deleted. And also like if you don't want to, if you are having several EC2 instances which you made, you want to make and you don't want to separately delete again all the EBS, right? In that scenario also you can just select it as yeah, yes. Now encryption. So what encryption will do? Any idea? In case of EBS,
I think it encrypts the data.
so any image or anything you are storing in the EBS will be encrypted, right?
Right.
So do you think when you are installing the OS also, like when the EC2 instance is being formed, the OS is being installed in the EC2 instance where the OS is getting all the resources from the EC2 instance. So even the OS files will be encrypted or not? Brandon?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So we also store OS files in the EBS, right? So do you think even the OS files will also be encrypted?
No.
So what are being actually encrypted when you use the encryption?
The sensitive information, like the data you put in there.
Do you think you are having the control like, on which will be encrypted or which will not be encrypted?
I don't think you have that control. Something like that.
So whole disk will be encrypted, right? Or whole drive will be encrypted.
Correct. Yeah.
So this encryption will be not on the data but on the whole drive, right? So whenever you
Right.
want to use these drives, the encryption key has to be provided. Okay. So how this encryption works? Let's study. Now, whenever you're having this encryption, you can have it for the root volume and secondary volumes. Okay, in the EC2 instance. So whenever you are encrypting the elastic block storage volume and you are attaching it to the supported availability zone instance, the data which is encrypted is of four types. So data at rest. What is data at rest? The data which is stored in the EBS and it is not being utilized or it is just stored in the EBS. Now there could be another kind of encryption which is done, which is where the instance is using the data from the EBS and this data is also encrypted. Now again, when we have studied about the backup or recovery of the EBS, we have studied that we can create time-based snapshots. So for all these snapshots also, you can have the encryption. And this encryption is again based on data at rest. And all the volumes which you are creating from the EBS which is encrypted will also have the encryption. So mostly all the data is encrypted. And whenever you want to use an EC2 instance, you have to always provide the decryption key, which will decrypt the data so that it can be utilized. Now you can see here it is written that this is a KMS key and it's also giving you like, okay, this is a default encryption which is being there. So AWS provides you with a default encryption or you can have a space customized KMS key. So if you try to say like, okay, encryption 1 and save it. So this will be a new encryption key which is being created by the AWS specifically for this particular EC2 instance. Now, do you think in uh, having a encryption on the disk will increase the cost? Brandon?
No.
Yeah. It doesn't actually increase the cost. It is kind of like a what do you call an additional way to protect or secure your data from data breaches. Now you can see there are two kinds of file systems also for the EBS. One is EFS and another is FSX. So what is EFS and FSX? We will be discussing in tomorrow's class. But this is about EBS and EBS is very simple as like it is just an hard drive for your OS in the laptop. So if you are having a Mac, again you will be using same resources. You will be having a solid state drive, you'll have your RAM and everything same. Now, whenever you are creating an EC2 instance, you can see you are getting a summary here. Like what is the OS you are using, and what the server type, firewall, and storage volumes. Yeah. So this is mostly about EBS. Okay. Now let's go into more details. What do you think EFS is and what do you think FSX is? Were these discussed? Ken?
I think that the types of partitioning or something.
So actually, each of these have their own speciality mostly. So whenever you are having an EC2 instance, okay, there is one kind of like storage system known as elastic file system, and another is FSX. Okay. So again, EBS has these two kinds of file systems. Okay. So EBS is a volume and it has two kinds of file systems, EFS and FSX, and these two are different from the hardware requirements like solid state drive and hard disk drive and or magnetic storage. So EFS is now nothing but elastic file system. So elastic file system has many advantages. So the first advantage of this elastic file system is that you can store the data in different availability zones. In EBS, you can store usually only in the single availability zone, and the availability zone of EBS should match the availability zone of EC2 instance. But in elastic file system, you can store it in many availability zones. Now, one more thing, okay? So whenever you are trying to scale up the EBS, okay, and if this is the root drive which is attached to your EC2 instance, the application will be having some downtime whenever you are scaling up the EBS. And if you don't want to have this downtime, okay, then you have to use elastic file system, because whenever you are scaling up the elastic file system, what happens is that your application will not go down. It will be running and the storage will be scaled. Uh, till here it is clear.
Yeah.
So why do you think AWS came up with EFS? The first thing was to reduce the downtime. That was the main issue. And also one more thing is to have the data available in many availability zones so that user can access it easily. So EFS is acting mostly like a flash drive. So if you're having a drive in your laptop, okay, again you cannot directly use that drive in another laptop, because you have to detach it, then you have to again attach it to the laptop, then you can use it. But flash drive you can just plug in one laptop, and again you can just plug in another laptop just by removing it and keeping it in another laptop. So EFS provides such kind of like portability. Now EFS, when you will use EFS after kind of like seeing its advantages, what do you think, where would be this EFS based storing applicable? Ken? Brandon?
I'm not sure.
So the normal application would be for storing. That is simple application. But main thing about EFS is that you can attach it to several EC2 instances. Not only to the EC2 instances, but also to the on-premise. So if you are having your laptop, okay, and this like your personal laptop and you're facing storage issues, okay, you can attach the elastic file system directly to your laptop and you can store things and you can use it like a hard drive. That is an interesting application, right? And why it is an interesting application is that, let's say I'm having my laptop and you're having your laptop, and let's say Ken is having his laptop. Now I can create one elastic file system which can be shared for all these three laptops. So you can have a shared storage where you can kind of like develop an application or have a team work on some particular project, right? And also more interesting things about EFS is that you can, as an admin, you can choose what file can be accessed by which on-premise laptop or on-premise server. Till here it's clear.
Yeah.
Now, what are the disadvantages? It's having many advantages. There should be some disadvantages, right? Now, the first disadvantage is that you cannot use Windows based operating system or Windows based EC2 instances or Windows based on-premise laptops to use EFS. So for EFS, Windows is not supported. So it can support Mac, it can support Linux, or it can support any kind of Linux based operating systems. And the next thing is that EFS cannot be used as a root storage where you can, like, you cannot use EFS for uh, storing the operating system on which EC2 instances are dependent on. So these volumes are usually called as boot volumes because these are used to boot the operating system. Okay. Till here it's clear.
Yeah.
So EFS is costly, and like costly in the sense that it is more costly than S3 and normal EBS. So let's see how to create an EFS. So if you see elastic file system, you can see EFS, right? Now if you go into EFS, we'll come back to EC2 instance again after seeing EFS. So you can see the pricing here. So there is always something known as AWS pricing calculator. So if you want to estimate anything, so you can see that, okay, you can select the region and let's say I'm selecting the Virginia, and if I want to use elastic file system, let's say, can you see my screen? Let's say elastic file estimate. region. So we are using just standard storage, and there's also one zone storage. Now, what is the difference between standard storage and one zone storage is that when you are selecting the standard, the EBS or elastic file system, okay, it always creates replicates on zone so that if one is not available, you'll have another copy which can be used. When you store one zone storage, it's like very low cost, okay, but the problem is that it can be usually used when you're having infrequent access, like you're not accessing the storage continuously. But mostly when you're using a elastic file system, you usually go for one zone storage because you'll not be accessing it frequently. But when it comes to a team which is working on some application or some kind of project, there will be continuous application. So for that also you are given the like kind of like choice whenever you're calculating the estimate. Now how much storage you want? Let's say you want to use 30 GB per month, and how much data will be accessed frequently from this 30 GB. Let's say I'm accessing only uh, 5 GB of the data. 5, yeah. So let's say it's about mostly 40, 50, 30, 20%, yeah, 25%. Yeah, we can just say 20%. And how many requests are going, or like let's say we are having 20 requests or something. Okay, do you know what is provision throughput and elastic throughput, Brandon?
No.
So there are two kinds of throughputs, okay. One is provision and another is uh, elastic throughput. So provision throughput we have discussed in IO1 and IO2, if you remember, right?
Right.
Now, what do you mean by like in IO1 and IO2? What we discussed is mostly about the uh, like how many inputs and how many outputs are being like processed. And whenever there are many inputs and many outputs, we discuss that we will be using the IO1 or IO2 storage, right?
Right.
So in case of elastic throughput, okay, it is actually the difference is on how the throughput or like how the usage is determined. So in case of elastic, we determine the usage by the amount of data which is being read from the storage and written in the storage. Okay. Now this is normally which is done even in case of like most of the cloud services. Only elastic throughput is there. But in case of AWS, we are having provisioned throughput. So provisioned throughput, the billing or the usage is measured on based on like how much data is stored in the elastic file system. So it's not based on amount of data read and written, but how much is stored itself is being used to calculate your bill or your usage. So that's why here if you see, it is just asking you how much you are using. That's it. So if I say 200, it will just give me the cost based on 200. 10 based on the So, but when you select elastic throughput, you can see it is asking how much reading and how much writing is happening, right? So when you go for provision throughput, it doesn't matter how much reading and writing is being done, but how much data is being stored in the elastic file system, that will determine the cost. So if you see, if I'm saying like I'm accessing 5 GB and I'm writing again 5 GB, you'll see that the cost is given like okay 3 GB, 3 USD. Okay, but because here even though you are having 30 GB of the storage, you are only reading and writing 5 GB, so that's why you are having lesser cost. But when you go into provision throughput, if you are saying that okay you are using 5 GB, you are just storing 5 GB, let's say, still you are paying $30. And in the same way, if you are storing 30 GB, then it's 180 USD. And it will show you the calculations also here, like 6 GB per month, you are using 730 hours and everything. And this is the cost you will be incurring. So elastic file system is more costly, but when you go into one storage, like one zone storage, and let's see, use the same 30 GB and 20 and again 20, and you are using 30 GB, you can see that the cost is increased a little bit. But when you go for elastic throughput and use 5 GB and 5 GB, the cost is half, right? Ken? Hello? Hello, Brandon?
Yeah.
So you can see that even though it is a low cost, performance optimized storage, when you are using a provisioned throughput, the cost is not having that different. But the cost difference comes when you are using elastic throughput. So you should always estimate first by using this AWS calculator, okay, before using any kind of like storage, or before estimating, okay, this kind of elastic file system will be better for this particular client. So is it clear about AWS pricing calculator?
Yeah.
So let's go back to the EFS. Can you see my EFS tab?
Yeah.
Now let's go and create file system. uh, let's just call it elastic file one. It's asking for one zone. So standard we have seen that, and you can even customize this. So this is automatic backup. So you can enable or disable. If you disable, you will not have a copy in the same availability zone and you will lose the data. If you enable it, you will have. And also there is lifecycle management. Even in the S3 bucket, we have seen the lifecycle management where whenever you are having data being stored for more than 30 days, you can send it to Glacier, Tire, right? So here also we are having uh, whenever you're having some files which are not being accessed for at least 30 days, okay, these will be sent to infrequent access. So in infrequent access, the cost of using the EFS comes down whenever you are moving files to infrequent access. So this actually is done by AWS automatically, and you can select whichever, like let's say you want only 1 day, and like whichever is not being accessed in like for about 1 day, they will move to infrequent access. Now when you want to move a file from infrequent access to the standard, So let's say you have not used a file for 90 days, okay, and suddenly your application is starting to use that file. So you can just say that, okay, whenever the file is being accessed, it should be moved directly to standard. So you can do that. Now again, enabling encryption of data at rest, that means like whatever the data is there in the EFS, it will be encrypted with some encryption key, and you can just select any encryption key, or you can create an AWS encryption key. So yeah, so there are two kinds of symmetric and asymmetric. This we will be discussing when we are discussing the encryption in detail. So for now we are using all the default encryption based things. You can have a key, AWS EFS key, and you can just click next. We don't need any kind of like, we are selecting all the default options for now. So this will create the key. Now you can directly go into EC2. You can see that key is there. You can select the key. Everything is enabled. Now throughput mode. There is bursting and enhanced. So even in S3 we have seen this uh, option of bursting. So in case of bursting, what happens is that whenever you are having, or your data which is coming from the EC2 instance is kind of like more than the storage capacity which is provided by EFS, the EFS will increase its memory by itself and try to accommodate all the data. Now, what is the advantage of EFS which we discussed? The first advantage which we discussed was that EFS will not have a downtime even though when there is some scaling which is occurring in the EFS file system, right? Brandon?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, EFS, even like whenever you are scaling the EFS, the application is not affected or EC2 instance is not affected. So that means like EFS, if you are having let's say 30 GB initially and you want to make it 50 GB, when you are doing this transition from 30 to 50 GB, the application will not have any downtime, unlike EBS which will have some downtime, right? Do you agree
Right.
with this? Yeah. Now in case of bursting, what is happening is that whenever you are scaling, it also increases the number of input output operations which are being performed in this elastic file system. So let's say you are initially having only 30 GB of space, okay, and suddenly you require 60 GB of space, but in 30 GB the input operations which were going on were, let's say, 5 GB per second, and now you are transitioning into 50 GB. EFS directly will increase the 5 GB per second to 10 GB per second based on the requirement. So that is called as bursting. In case of enhanced, what happens is that there is more flexibility. So the increase in the number of input output operations, which is usually called as throughput, is done based on the performance required by the application. So there are two kinds of like performances. Now if you go and click next, again you can select many availability zones. So you can have B, C, D, E, F. Now what is the what is the advantage of having so many availability zones with an EFS? Ken? Brandon?
It's a rough guess, but I guess it means there's backed up across multiple zones.
Yeah, so what we have discussed about EFS is that it can be attached to different availability zones, right? That is a good advantage of the EFS. So it is available in all these availability zones. So you can directly use this elastic file system and attach it to all the any of the availability zones, or you can attach it to all the availability zones, right? But the only disadvantage we talked about is booting. It cannot be used for storing the OS, right? And also one more disadvantage which we discussed was that it cannot be used with Windows based operating systems. So even though I'm having a Windows, I cannot just attach EFS to Windows, but I can attach it to Linux, even for on-premise or on server. Now we are having policy options. So even when we used S3, we had policy, right? So one policy is that prevent root access. Root access is nothing but the OS based operating system. So you can directly prevent it. And read only access is that you cannot write anything to this elastic file system, but only you can read. Anonymous access is that whenever you are providing or sharing the elastic file system link to another person, unless they are registered with the AWS and you have added them in the policy, they cannot access the elastic file system. And also the encryption, like whenever someone wants to access, they should have an encryption key. So you can just prevent root access by default, and you can select others also based on the application. And these are the settings which we have selected, and you can just create it. So you can see that it's getting created. Now it's available. So now you can see that the total size as of now is 6 KB, which is being utilized. And availability zone is standard. That means we have 1A, 1B, 1C, which we have selected. In those, all the availability zones, this will be available. And we have talked about some services, but let's see, the monitoring is being done by the AWS. So it takes some time. So you can see that you have how much utilization being like happening here. You can see it's about 75% utilization, and input output operations by type, throughput type, how much storage is being utilized, what are the how many client connections you are having, like when the connection happened, and how much input output limit has been exceeded, and everything will be given here. And you can have it based on weekly stats and hourly stats. And the tags, we did not give any tag, but file system policy, this is the policy which we made. And whenever you want to uh, give access to other on-prem servers or EC2 instances or other AWS accounts, you'll be creating an access point here. So this access point, if you create the access point, now this access point can be shared with other people so that they can access it. You can have the details here, and this is the ARN. If you provide this ARN to other AWS account, they can directly access your EFS. Now this also depends on the policy. Okay, why Ken? Why this will depend on policy sharing the elastic file storage with other users? Hello, hello, Brandon.
Yeah.
So why creating an access point and store like sharing it with the other users is dependent on policy.
Because with the policies you could give um, separate access, I guess.
In the policy, we have several like blockers, right? So we if we don't give anonymous access, we have to register the user and then provide him the access point. Or if you are having only read-only access, the person cannot store any files in the Elastic file system, but only have he can read the files from the Elastic system, right?
Right.
So the policy should be set in such a way that the user to whom you are giving the access point should have all the access. Not all the access, the required access mostly. And you can replicate it also. You can see that there is a replication tab and you can directly create replication, and you can choose in which region you want to replicate. Let's say you want to replicate in Seoul, you can choose Seoul. Now the problem is that mine is a free tier, so I'm getting some errors, but Ohio is there. So you can have anywhere, and you can just have the encryption key and you can just click on create replication. It will replicate the whole disk. Also in the backup, I told you about, like, one is to create these replications, another is to create a snapshot, another is which is being provided by AWS, which is AWS backup, right? So in the AWS backup, you can create your own backup plan. So you can either have a star template. If you don't, we do, if you have a template like 1 year retention, 35-day retention, these are the templates which are already present. You can create your own plan. So for now, let's use the template, and you can see that you have 35-day plan. You can have a backup name. Let's say EFS backup. So you can add backup rule like uh, daily backup. You can create new one, or there is also one and backup frequency you are having. You can backup based on like daily, 12 hours, weekly, monthly. So let's say I want only weekly backup. I can even select which day I want to backup: Monday, Wednesday, let's say, and Friday. Saturday, Sunday we don't work, so it doesn't require. Now, point in time recovery backups are nothing but these are kind of like continuous backup. And this backup, what it does is like it also compares the files if there has been any kind of like change which has happened from yesterday to today, and it will try to see like it needs to be backed up or not. And the backing up occurs continuously, like with a second gap. So this is only preferable when you are having an application which is having the data updated in milliseconds, like WhatsApp or something. Now backup window, like when you want the backup to start, so you can select a customized backup window, like you want it to be happening morning 4 3, and you don't need to have anything. And if you add this backup rule, and you can create the backup plan. Okay, this is working. Okay. Okay, again I have a free tier, so cannot use this, but we'll start creating backup. So you can have the backup based on AWS backup, and you can see the backup plan has been created here. Let's go back to the Amazon FSx, share this tab. So that's how you can backup your whole Elastic file system. This is one way to backup, but backup also you can see the cost estimator for backup. Okay, So if you go into AWS backup and click on configure and just backup service. So if you want to use the EFS and you are using, let's say, 30 GB of EFS, we don't have any great growth rate, let's say we can have a 2% change. Now you can choose hourly backup, weekly, hourly transition to what is cold storage, infrequent access. So how much is being like how much of the data is being sent into infrequent access because it's not being accessed, and this we have done in the AWS life cycle, right? So you can see that it is 1.5 USD per month if you are backing up EFS of 30 GB, right? And the same thing you can check for other services also, like if you are having EBS. For EBS, if you are backing up, let's say for 30 GB, it is again same. So do you think AWS backup is better than the replication, Brandon?
Isn't it the same thing? What do you mean the AWS backup is better than replication?
So replication and backup are not same. Replication is nothing but you're trying to create a copy of the elastic file system, right? And this is a service provided in the EFS itself. Now AWS backup is a whole different service which backs up other services. Understand?
Okay.
So again, creating a snapshot based on time is different from replication. And even the replication is only mostly possible in the in a different availability zone. By default, AWS always creates replicas of the elastic file system, and whenever we were creating it, we have seen that, right? Automatically create backup of the elastic file system. So there are different ways to backup an AWS service you are using, but AWS backup is a new service which is being introduced by AWS for backing up the data every, like, based on frequency. Like you can back up every second, every day, or based on some different, like based on, like, let's say you only want to back up on Mondays in the morning or Fridays in the evening. So that flexibility is being given by AWS for backing up. And AWS pricing calculator, did you understand how to use it now?
Somewhat.
So because like most of the next case studies will be dependent on AWS pricing calculator, because you have to select these services based on the cost. Cost optimization is the very important thing. Okay, so today's homework for you will be to create an elastic file system and also to create an AWS EC2 instance with IO1 storage. So you have to create an elastic file system like I have created. So
Okay. Okay.
I'll be sending it to you. So the first thing is to create an elastic file system. Second is create an AWS EC2 instance with 40 GB of EBS and storage type IO1.
You're sending it to me right now, right?
Yeah, I'm sending it. I'm just making a text file. I'll be sending it to you. So third one will be create a replication of EFS in the Virginia availability zone. Calculate storage cost per month for 40 GB of EBS and storage type GP2. Calculate storage cost per month for the EC2 instance with 40 GB EBS with GP2. Save as. Still 10th, right? At your end. Okay, I have sent the homework in the group. Okay, can you complete it
Okay.
till tomorrow?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the homework. Please complete it. I hope you got the homework.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Okay, Ken and Brandon, let's meet tomorrow. So tomorrow the time will be 9 p.m. Ontario time, right?
Yeah.
Again, the time did not change, right? Because today no one joined at the time, so the time is not any like increased or decreased, right? At your end. Okay. Okay, let's meet tomorrow.